Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. As you know, a couple weeks ago, I tried to have a discussion on the philosophy of time, and it didn't go quite as expected. We ended up discussing other things instead. So now we are back with some people who have some knowledge on the topic of philosophy of time, and we are going for take two. So hello, Dave, and hello, Leophilius.
Hello,
Howdy.
Gigi.
Dave, I know you've been on my channel before. Leo, I'm not sure if you have or not. I've seen you in the chat plenty of times, but I don't think I've had you as a guest before, have I?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I
Well,
might.
go
I
ahead.
feel like I might have been on briefly during an open room. You might have had like a year and a half ago, but don't quote me on that because I might be wrong.
That's okay. I have the excuse of age. You know, I have no problem remembering what happened in 1980, but remembering what happened 4 months ago is very difficult. Okay, so Leo, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, so I am Leophilius, otherwise known as Leophilius, here on YouTube. And that's just a joke that I do because a lot of people call me Leophilus the first time. So, I do not have any degrees or really any formal collegiate level education, like credit wise, in anything, but I have an interest in subjects such as astrophysics and cosmology, particularly on the theoretical side, particle physics, quantum mechanics, and the philosophy of physics, philosophy of space and time, the philosophy of quantum mechanics, things like that, as well as just metaphysics and the philosophy of science broadly, which extends into things like the philosophy of time and even causality and things of that nature.
Logan, let's see, here it is. Logan Fisher says, "Hey, it's Leophilius."
That actually would be a pretty nice name to have there, Leophilus. That would be. But yes, I do have a channel. If those kinds of things interest you, I know philosophy isn't everybody's, favorite bucket of fish, but I do have discussions and debates and stuff with Christians and creationists on my channel. I recently just had a discussion with Rebecca from Bread of Life. I don't know if you or anybody in the audience is familiar with her, about the evidence for the hot Big Bang. And while it was a passionate discussion, I nonetheless think that it was a very, very good discussion.
Good. When Alex O'Connor announced that he was going to be getting a degree in philosophy, I was scratching my head and said, why? What a waste of time. And now I am finding that again and again and again, I am running up against concepts in philosophy I don't understand. And I'm going, now I get it.
That's the thing that I've always wondered is what possesses people to sit and think about like this one thing for 40 years. And then you start thinking about things and you're like, no, now I get it. Now I get it.
Once it starts leading you into all the connecting things, you can see why 100 years is wasted just thinking about it.
Yep, exactly.
So Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Dave. I'm over here in the UK. I usually stream with a channel called Answers and Reason, but I have my own channel as well where I put like videos and stuff like that. I have a couple of degrees. I'm currently working on another one as well. But I'm nowhere near as smart as Leo is.
Okay. And there is a link to Dave's YouTube channel in the description. Leo, I have a link to your Twitter page, because I was not aware that you had a YouTube page. If one of my moderators wouldn't mind, go ahead and grab a link to Leo's YouTube channel and stick that in the chat, and I will pin that. And then after the show, I will put that in the description.
If you go into the description of the video and just type @ and then start writing out the channel name, it should tag the channel. I know it's like only a few months old. I think maybe 5 or 6. So sometimes it might be a little hit and miss, but usually you should be able to go in, at least with my channel, because you can hide the ability for people to tag you, but I don't have that. So you should be able to just and then type out Leophilius and then select my channel, and that should tag me in the description as an actual link. And then when people click on it, it'll obviously take them to my channel.
Okay, very good. All right, let's go ahead and get started with our topic. And of course, anytime we're going to discuss anything in philosophy, we've got to start with definitions. So I'll let both of you discuss, what do you think is the answer to the question, what is time?
Do you want to start, Leo?
I'm okay with that, but if you've got something you want to say first, that's fine.
I was just going to go into how it's not really something that's kind of concrete or laid down. There's a couple of options. There's people who think time is kind of just like a big bucket that everything exists in, and it's a part of the fabric of the universe. And there's also those who argue that time is actually connected to matter, emotion, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would say that to play on that the question you asked relates to when I sort of lay out time is that the first part, the part that most people are concerned about when we ask these kinds of questions is usually what is the ontology of time? What is the nature of time? What is it as a thing? Is it a thing in the world? Is it a concept? Is it concrete? Is it abstract? How can it be defined? Does it flow? Is it static? Is it dynamic? And all of these questions play into the philosophy of time. But for me, because I think that, and this has been somewhat bolstered by the past 2 days of my sort of going back through a lot of the literature that exists in the philosophy of time, is that a lot of people who talk about it, I think, not everybody, but I think that most of the philosophers and the metaphysicians, when they talk about time, it's not to say that it's done purposefully, but it seems that they really ignore a lot of what physics has to say about this. And I think that physics has a hell of a lot to say about time in ways that we don't really have. It tells us things that we don't get from just certain epistemic considerations or pragmatic considerations or phenomenal considerations with respect to time. So for me, I'm going to define time as a physical dimension through which things can be objects, physical objects and processes can be extended. It's not the same thing as space, but it is obviously analogous to space in a variety of ways. And then that gets into the spatializing of time, which is something that's talked about in the metaphysics of time. But for me, time is something that is real. It is a physically real thing. It's not just a concept. It's not some abstract notion existing in some Platonic way. It is a physical thing that is a part of the world that causally interacts with the things extended through it. Now, whether or not it is a fundamental feature of this physical reality or an emergent feature is a discussion that is currently being had by physicists. I would probably trend toward emergent, but that's how I would answer. It's very, very long answer, but that's how I would answer the question of what is time. I would say that time is just it's a dimension, it's a physical feature of external reality, and we can understand it empirically.
You mentioned that physical objects can move through it. If physical objects did not exist, would that mean that time then did not exist?
So that's a very, very good question. That relates to, and correct me if I'm getting the terms wrong here, Dave, but I believe that's it's the substantivalism versus relationism debate in time. Is time. This is going to be probably a really simplistic way of describing these, but I still think it does them some justice. So I think the relational view is sort of this idea that time emerges out of objects and their change, so that if there were no objects, there would be no change and there would be no time. Whereas I might be getting this backwards, but I don't think I am. Whereas substantivalists would say that time is like, I guess you could say sort of like a substance that objects change within, so that you could take the objects out of it and that time would still be there. Yeah. And please, Dave, if there's anything you want to say.
No, you're getting good. Yeah, it's kind of, you can kind of go back to Plato and Aristotle with these two. Plato is about the relational, and Aristotle is kind of about the substantive. And I think Newton was substantive as well, because he believed time was a force that acted upon objects rather than it was like based on motion and things like that.
Okay. We have a comment from Mark Caesar. I like that time is apart from space and that you can travel through time differently from others dependent upon velocity. I'm not sure what he's trying to get at there. Maybe one of you can comment on that.
Time dilation. That the closer you move to the speed of light, the elapsed time read by the clock associated with the object moving close to the speed of light will be less than the elapsed time that you will have on the clock in your hand.
Okay.
And this is why physics actually plays quite a substantive role in this, more so than I think, like I said earlier, a lot of metaphysicians or philosophers studying this would want to admit, because a lot of early discussions about the philosophy of time to some extent did play into certain theological notions.
Right.
And we can get into how time plays into theological.
That's exactly where I'm planning to go. That's exactly. First, there is an aspect that has come up in several discussions that I've watched and that I don't totally understand, and that is the idea of infinite regress. And I was telling Dave before the show that when I heard Majesty of Reason discussing that, I love Joe Schmid. I went and bought a copy of the book that he had behind him, but I haven't started it yet because I'm a bit intimidated by it.
There's one thing I want to say just quickly with respect, just because I think it's a very important thing to say. I think Dave will agree with me on this, is that I have a book here that I got for Christmas, Metaphysics and Science, by Stephen Mumford and Matthew Tugby. And Stephen Mumford's a pretty prominent philosopher of science. I mean, Matthew Tugby's not prominent, but Stephen Mumford's he's up there. And I am somewhat intimidated by it. I mean, on my Google Chrome, I've got 6 articles in the SEP, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, just to brush up on some stuff before I dive into the book. But I always tell people, don't let the intimidation stop you. It may be true that you have to read a book or an article more than once. That's been true for me, I think, more than it hasn't been, particularly in science and philosophy. Understanding these things does generally take some time. So even if we're intimidated, dive right in, do your best, reread if you need to, talk with people that you think know more than you about this. And people like Graham Oppy and Alex Malpass, who are PhD philosophers, are pretty open actually about having discussions with people on this stuff. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Sorry about that.
Okay, very good. Dave?
Yeah, I agree. It's
okay.
There's nothing that I did when I was studying it where I didn't have to read it 5 or 6 times. Anybody who says that they pick up a philosophy paper and get it immediately is probably fooling themselves.
I used to do that at one time until I went to law school. And I taught myself to stop doing that because in law school, we had to read 300 pages a night. And if you had to read something twice, you weren't going to finish. So what I did was I slowed down the pace of my reading just a bit so that I made sure I never had to read anything twice. Now I think I need to change that habit.
Philosophy, you got to read slow and twice. And usually end up having to look up a bunch of words because philosophers use many words slightly differently to how they're used colloquially.
Okay, so tell me about infinite regress. Is it possible? Is it illogical?
Alex Malpass does a lot of good stuff on this. I would say that there's nothing logically contradictory about an infinite regress. It doesn't make intuitive sense, but there's nothing logically incoherent about it.
Okay.
I think with respect to, I think an infinite regress, yeah, like Dave said, there's no, you're not going to be able to derive a logical contradiction there. And you'll notice that William Lane Craig, when he's in a debate and he pulls this argument when he's defending the Kalam cosmological argument, he'll often make the statement, the rather, I think, brash statement, that an infinite regress in time is metaphysically impossible. Now,
Exactly.
tabling the discussions about what metaphysical impossibility even means, because believe me when I tell you, most metaphysicians will tell you they don't fully understand the whole metaphysical modality, possibility and impossibility, metaphysically speaking. So tabling all of that, when he's talking with professional philosophers, like when his discussion with Alex Malpass, I believe that was on the Capturing Christianity channel. That was a bit of a higher level discussion, actually. He also had one with Graham Oppie, and they talked about this. And in both of these discussions, he did not, in fact, I'm not going to accuse him of backpedaling, but he did not make that brash claim and did not seem keen on defending that brash claim that an infinite regress, at least in time, is metaphysically impossible. So I find that interesting. But the broad point is that I think when we talk about an infinite regress with respect to specifically time, I don't think there's a problem with the idea simplicator. When we're talking about it with respect to time, I think that's going to depend on something that I'm sure we'll touch on many times in this discussion, which is kind of goes back to McTaggart, but others have developed two different ways of looking at time that have, broadly speaking, been come to known as the A theory and the B theory of time. Because in the A theory, there are defined moments of time that we move through one after the other. And in that sense, if you tried to instantiate an infinite number of these events and start from an infinitely far away and get to some moment, you would have an infinite number of moments to get to. What would it mean to say that you got to some moment? But if time doesn't work that way, if there isn't a specified partitioning of temporal events and we succeed through them in some concatenated manner, there's just like time, then there's going to be no problems with it extending indefinitely into the past, because there isn't an infinite amount of some set of things that we must successively move through under more of a B theory.
If you were working under the A theory and you take any kind of movement, the one that I'm used to hearing about, you shoot an arrow. You can, yes, you can progressively see the arrow was at different points of time, but you could take an infinite number of slices between any of those moments. So wouldn't that alone, I don't want to say debunk, that's not the word that I want, but isn't that counter to that theory of time?
That sounds kind of like Zeno's paradox.
Zeno's paradox. That relates, I think, to just one can take any finite distance and arbitrarily have it ad infinitum. But that does not entail that there is a literal infinite amount of something contained within that arbitrarily and finite defined distance, like whatever it may be. So that's going to be that would be at least what my response would be. And I think that other logicians and meta logicians like Alex Malpass would probably agree with that sentiment.
Okay. Leo, would you say most physicists hold to the A theory or the B theory of time?
I would say that most physicists are probably going to hold to what's called four-dimensionalism, which is, for all intents and purposes in this discussion, we can consider it synonymous with the B theory, but there are some nuances there, but they're just not important really to what we're talking about. But it's kind of like a specified version of a B theory, but it gets into just some of the physics of how we talk about space-time as a four-dimensional, a Minkowski space, as it's oftentimes called. But yes, most physicists would identify with a B theory or some B theoretical tensorless view of time.
Okay. Okay. One of the big questions that I have run into in theological debates is there such a thing as before time? I frequently hear the argument that God is timeless. He lives outside of time. He created time, and time began at a particular point when God created it. And the argument I make is that that is not possible, because that would have to mean that God existed before time, and before time is an incoherent concept. Is that a logical argument, or is that a good argument?
I think that it is. To me, I would say that saying before time is like saying outside space. It's like saying north of the North Pole. You're taking a term that presupposes some concept in order to define what that term means, and trying to apply it in a way that abandons or is outside of the very concept it must presuppose to be defined. To say that you're outside of something makes references to differences in spatial orientation. What sense would it make to talk about being outside of space itself? Much like, what sense does it make to say that you're north of the very point that which you use to reference what it means to be north? What does it mean to say before the very thing you need to define what before means? So yeah, I think that it is a good argument. And I think that one could probably construct a logical argument and derive a contradiction in saying that what's happening here is, when you say before time, it's an attempt at instantiating a contradiction, an A and a not A simultaneously, in the same way, in the same sense, at the same time. And then that's just a straightforward logical contradiction. It would be like saying I moved up downwardly. It makes no sense.
Dave, what are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I agree. Especially is because I kind of hold to the relational aspect of time. So time is like a way of measuring things, events, and distances between events. And you can't have, if you have events, you have time, basically. So if God does something, he has to exist in time.
Logan says, I don't think I've heard that explained more simply before. Great explanation.
There is one thing I want to say, and that is that this actually, there's a reason why William Lane Craig and some other apologists tangential to him will argue that God was timeless song creation, but temporal from creation onward.
Yeah.
Because the objection that's often raised is, well, if God was in a state of timelessness and creation is an act, acts require time, how could God have created if there were no time? And so what Craig would say is, well, God's creation of time is perfectly simultaneous with times coming into being. They are one and the same event, and thus there is no contradiction. That's however,
the way I've understood it.
Yes, yes. That, however, can be confounded by what we know from special relativity, the relativity of simultaneity. No two events are ever absolutely simultaneous. That is, simultaneous from all possible perspectives.
Interesting. Expand on that a bit.
So what special relativity tells us is that the time associated with some event in space-time is much like the motion associated with some event in space-time. It's a relative concept. If you had some space-time and you were the only, it doesn't even have to be you, there was some object and it was the only object in that space-time, what sense would it make to say that it's moving at 100 kilometers per hour?
Okay.
So the idea is that time is the same way. And this has been empirically measured, and we have to consistently correct for time dilation for our technology to function properly. And I can certainly expound on that later. But the faster that an object moves through space, the slower it moves through time. And we know this because of we know this because of the constancy of the speed of light. The speed of light and the fact that it's constant, it's not just that the speed of light is constant, it's that it's a constant. a constant of proportionality between space and time. The faster you move through space, the less the amount of time elapsed on your clock is, such that if you're moving at the speed of light, your clock does not tick. And this is why you can't exceed the speed of light. Because there is, once you've reached that speed, at least in the direction of your travel, there is no more space-time for you to go faster into, because your clock does not tick. That's why you cannot exceed the speed of light. So I am stationary with respect to the Earth right now. So I am moving not at all through space, but I am moving at the speed of light through time. And so if I were moving at the speed of light through space, my clock would not tick, i.e., I would not move through time. So the more you move through space, the less you move through time. And the effects of that between things moving at different rates is what we call time dilation. And yes, this has been empirically observed.
Okay, you said one thing there that really threw me, that you are moving at the speed of light. I thought you were moving at the speed with which the Earth is revolving. Why
But
are you moving
with
at the speed of
respect
light?
to the Earth. So relative to the Earth, I'm not moving. Just like relative to my chair, I'm not moving. But me and the chair and the floor and the house, etc., are all moving with the Earth. But if I just take my motion with respect to the chair, I'm stationary. And so that's why this is called relativity, because what we're defining about some of these features with respect to these objects in space-time is relative to other things in space-time. There's no objective fact of the matter about an object's position, its motion, its orientation, or its time.
Okay, but specifically, you said that you are moving at the speed of light. Why is that the speed you are moving at?
Through time, because I am not moving at all through space. And so through space, there's a maximum velocity through which you move through not just space, but through space-time. And you can change how you move through those the dimensions of space and the dimensions of time with respect to one another. So if you make it such that an object is not moving through any of the dimensions of space, then it is moving as fast as it can through time. We would interpret that as 1 second per second. If you're moving through space at what would be the spatial equivalent of 1 second per second, or c, the speed of light, then you're not moving through time at all. Your clock would not tick.
Okay, but if you got up and started walking away from your chair and you continued walking, then you would no longer be moving at the speed of light through space.
Time.
You would be moving faster than that through time. You'd be moving slightly faster than that through space and slightly slower than that through time. Is that correct?
So if I got up and walked away from my chair, with respect relative to my chair, I would start moving slightly slower through time, proportionate to the slight increase in my motion in space. So it's essentially, the more I start moving in space, the less I move in time. They're going to be proportionate to one another. Where one is 0, the other is 100. Where that one that was 100 is now 0, the other is 100. And this is why, at the speed of light, the max you can move through space, your clock does not tick, because you're not really moving through time.
Okay. The first time I was ever introduced to the concept that you are talking about was within a Superman movie. And Superman moved faster than the speed of light so that he could reverse time. Is that theoretical?
I mean, it's logically possible to imagine, an object moving faster than the speed of light. But if anybody who tried to work out the physics is going to run into a lot of walls very, very quickly that they're not going to be able to overcome. So,
okay. I wonder if you could youthen.
What's that?
I wonder if by going faster than the speed of light, you could youthen.
I don't think I know what that is.
Get younger.
Oh, okay.
Because you're reversing time, you would get younger as the faster you went.
And this is one of the empirical confirmations of time dilation. The Kelly twins. One of them went
Somebody
on
in
a
the
mission.
chat brought that up earlier.
Yeah. One of them went on a mission in space, and one of them was still on the Earth. And the one that went in space when he came back was actually just slightly younger. They were able to physiologically detect that his body was just slightly younger than his twin brother. Yes. And they were able
Wow.
to physiologically measure it. So, like I said, time dilation is an empirically confirmed feature of the real world, despite what people like William Lane Craig may say.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's absolutely mind-blowing to me. Okay, there's a comment we had a while ago that I starred because it was a really good comment and I wanted to bring it up. If God is outside of time and reality, God cannot do anything within time and reality. What do either of you think of that idea?
I'd say yes. But that's one of the reasons that they argue that once the temporal creation happened, he became part of the universe. And he was no longer outside of time and the universe.
But okay, I realize now we're going into theology, which isn't really your forte. But would that not require God to change his character, which the theologians, at least the Christian theologians, say is not possible?
I don't know enough about theology
that's
to
fine.
answer. Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine.
That's a tough question even for the theologians. I believe Craig has some work on this. I think this gets into differences between intrinsic and or essential versus accidental properties, and there's responses to it if you want to go through them, but they're kind of convoluted if you ask me, and it's just. You get kind of gummed up in a bunch of what I would consider needless philosophy for the sake of trying to rescue a preconceived ideal. But that's just me. I'm biased, obviously. I'm an atheist, so. But I mean, if you're interested, I can at least try. I don't know all that much, but I know that there are responses to that objection.
Logan Fisher says more and more people are admitting open theism because of just that. That's very interesting. I have noticed a huge shift in Christian thought, that it is moving away from the rigid theology that I was taught to believe in 40, 30 years ago. And that it's interesting that open theism may be more, some of that shift may be as a result of what we've discovered in physics. Nerdy wants to know, should I stop working on my LQ beer drive? I'm not sure what that is, but I'm guessing it's some kind of a warp drive.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I've heard of them, but I've never really looked into them because the whole like engineering side of it all with stuff I do physics, not engineering, so.
Mage Grey Wolf says, if God is part of our space and time, then he should be subject to our physics. Yes.
This actually plays to the question that you highlighted earlier about if God isn't in space-time, then how could he affect things in space-time? That plays to a notion that's an objection, something that's given as an expectation of like a physicalist or a naturalist metaphysical worldview, that we would expect there to be what's called the causal closure of the natural world, or the causal closure of the physical world, where it's an isolated, self-contained entity. There aren't things outside of it sort of, junking around with the stuff, monkeying with the stuff inside of it. Because if there were, like their hand would come out dripping in physics. Like, we would know about it because there would have to be some sort of interaction with the aspects of the physical world. And the minute you start interacting with them, we should be able to detect and measure those interactions. And we don't. And when we understand thermodynamics, the conservation of energy and momentum, the first and second laws of thermodynamics seem to show us that our universe is causally closed.
Okay. Um, does that have any implication for other universes? If our universe is causally closed, does that mean there can be no other universes, or does that have no effect on the idea of other universes?
Um, I hate saying this to people because, but it just depends on what you mean by universe.
Okay.
So if we take like universe to refer to particularly causally closed regions, but that are nested in some broader metaspace, then yeah, you could have. I mean, you could have a multiverse with that notion.
Right.
We would. It's not that causal closure means other things can't exist. It just means that we're never going to know about it because they can't causally interact with our space time and with our universe.
Okay.
For me personally, go ahead.
So if we ever find extraterrestrial life, it's going to be within our universe. It's not going to come from outside of our universe.
I think so, yes.
Okay, finish the thought you were starting.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that with respect to notions of a multiverse, I because of my particular metaphysical views, I think the concept of a multiverse is sort of incoherent. Not necessarily logically incoherent, maybe like metaphysically incoherent or something like that. But that's because I think that if our universe were merely a pocket nestled in some broader metaspace, then that whole metaspace would be the universe. It would be like the reason that our galaxies, we don't define galaxies as separate universes. They're just different regions within space-time. And that whole space-time, at least thus far, is the universe. And if we discovered the same thing with respect to our local pocket with respect to some others, then they're nestled in something, then that would just be the universe. And so you can, just like we've increased in scale in the past, we went from the planet to the solar system to the local stellar group to our galaxy to another galaxy to the local group to clusters to superclusters to the whole cosmic web. But it's never not been the universe. And I think that if we continue to increase that scale or discover that it is even larger, the same will be true. It will all still be the one universe. That's just my personal metaphysical view, though. I did certainly recognize many people, people whom I respect greatly, will disagree with that.
Do you agree with that, Dave?
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think it's just basically how we perceive what we're looking at. I see the universe as just containing all of reality. So if we have these pocket kind of, if we're going to call them universes, that would just be part of the actual universe rather than instantiations of universes themselves.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It does. I have pictured the universe as not necessarily being infinite. And because I don't think it's infinite, I think there could be another universe in existence. Now, I don't necessarily think there is. I just consider that it's theoretically possible.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. Eternal, and just to I don't want to derail us too much into cosmogony, but eternal inflation would say that I'm going to get a little technical here, but I can break it down. That our universe is really just, our local universe is sort of just a pocket of true vacuum near uniformly and homogeneously filled matter and radiation, expanding in broader inflationary metaspace, and that there are a variety of such of these pockets. They're essentially pockets of the right kind of energy structured the right kind of way to make a universe like ours within a defined boundary, and that those pocket universes, so to speak, are nestled in a broader inflationary metaspace. And a lot of physicists would consider those different pockets, different universes, in virtue of the fact that their fundamental laws could potentially differ slightly from ours. But again, me and Dave, we take the universe to just mean the totality of reality. So we would then say that that whole metaspace is the universe.
That brings up memories of a Bible study that I went to, where they played Neil deGrasse Tyson saying the cosmos, all that is, or was it Carl Sagan? I forget which. All that is, all that has ever been, and that they stopped it right after that statement and started laughing and saying, boy, is he dumb. He doesn't realize that there are things outside of the universe, namely God. And that all he's giving you is an introductory statement. That's kind of a strange place to stop him and start ridiculing him.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite quotes actually comes from Carl Sagan. That quote is, "The universe just is, and that's all."
Okay. There's a comment that came quite some time ago that I thought was of interest, and so I've had it starred, which was, what if our made in God's image really referred to his energy source being able to transcend limited time and space? That's an interesting thought. Any comments on that? Or not really?
I'm not really sure what it means.
I think what he's
Same.
trying to say is that, the Christians say that, or not just the Christians, but, all Abrahamic religions say that we are made in God's image. And maybe what that means is not that we are like God or we are, moral creatures like God, but rather that we have, that his energy source is within us, I think, is what maybe he's trying to say.
I mean, if
I've
somebody
heard a lot
believes
of-
that,
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say something like that.
I'm not going to say, "Oh, that's dumb." I'm saying, hey, right on, man. Whatever you believe. I'm one of those people. I'm kind of, not that you guys aren't, but that I, as long as you're not hurting other people, I believe what you want. But when it's like, yeah, let's like genocide a whole demographic of people off the planet because I think they're dirty, then we have problems. And I'm gonna stop you right there.
My issue with religion and why I am an anti-theist is that I have seen too much harm done by even mainstream religion. Now, I have since run into some people that I think actually do not have harmful beliefs, and Dr. Ryan Mullins is one of them. But I see so much hidden paternalism in most of mainstream Christianity. It's like a conversation I had quite recently with a very close relative of mine, where I was saying that a lot of the right wingers want women to stop being allowed in the workplace, and my relative was saying, "Oh no, that's not really what they believe." Now you do have to go to the extremists to see them saying that directly, that women belong at home. Do not let women go in the workplace. And the extremists are saying that. But if you go to the mainstream ones, they will say, well, it's okay for a woman to work outside of the home, but really the ideal is for her to stay home and be with the kids. And I don't think a lot of people realize how much pressure that puts on a woman to try to stay home and be with the kids and to give up her and any career goals that she has, to give up her aspirations and to feel like I need to give up who I am and what I am in order to please God. And this is why I find all of religion to be toxic, is because, okay, this is one of the more blatant forms, but I think all of religion has some form of wanting you to give up who you are so that you can please who they think God is.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. As I have, I don't want to derail us, so there are actually some things that I could say about some more things I can say with respect to time. But just to comment on that, as I've read further into Marxism, I've started to play around with anti-theism a little bit more, because the basic idea is that theism broadly instills metaphysical assumptions and cultural assumptions that are ultimately harmful with respect to the progressive development of human society. And so, and that we can see this in these institutions being utilized to retain traditional values and mores and retain traditional and hierarchical systems of social organization, primarily by the wealthy and the powerful, and that this is in virtue of the metaphysical assumptions and the cultural foundations of religion as an institution, and the intrinsic harm. And harm shouldn't the word harm has its place in as I use it here. Hopefully, I think people can really understand what I mean. I don't mean harm in the sense of like walking up to somebody and shooting them in the face point blank, but that it is in virtue of those sort of suppositions that underlie it that it is harmful to society broadly. So I think what you said, Godless Granny, there is actually is pretty good. I think I agree with that.
We have a follow-up from Talcumwum. I'm not sure how you say that. I don't have a belief. I'm searching for ideas. I'm recently escaped a high-control doomsday religion. And the first thing I want to say to you, Tal, is congratulations on finding your way out. Those of you who know my story know that it took me 42 years. And a big part of the reason it took me 42 years is I did not have the advantage of the internet. If I had had the internet when I was 16, I don't think I ever would have been a believer in the first place.
I do think the internet has affected the actual dynamic of religion quite a bit. It's like taking quite a knock.
Well, the last time that I saw William Lane Craig live on Capturing, or one of the last times I saw Craig live on Capturing Christianity, he had a nice little mic set up and everything, and I'm just like, oh, you getting serious with it now, huh? Are you, Bill? Okay. And that's what they're doing. You'll notice, like, Frank Turek, he just recently did a live stream with Stephen Meyer and Bill Craig on the Kalam cosmological argument. Like, they're doing a lot more live streams. They're coming on these Capturing Christianity, Trinity Radio, Unbelievable, stuff like that a lot more. They're moving into that online space because they realize if they don't, where the young atheists are, they're going to start losing their followers because there's not going to be anybody promoting their ideas in those spaces. And so you're starting to see all these, I'm going to word this a specific way. The best I can say is if you know, all these old white religious guys are slowly moving into the online space to try to, rescue their traditional ideas that I think are kind of sad and rather antiquated. But I'm speaking about I'm being a little biased in my speech there, so I should probably
Well, I think William Lane Craig has completely shot himself in the foot and has almost removed himself from the realm of a serious apologists when he made the statement that rather than raising the epistemic bar, that he lowers it all the way to the floor, and has thus acquired the moniker Low Bar Bill.
Damn it! I was gonna say.
Okay,
that.
I've not heard that one.
Yeah. Sorry. I stole your thunder.
I think that's funny though. Low bar. That one really cracks me up.
Yeah, but yeah, if his position is that in order to believe Christianity, it needs just an iota of reason to believe that it's true. But to believe anything else, you need substantial proof. That it tells you right away that the presupposition is this position is true, and it is because I presupposed it.
And because it makes you feel good.
Yeah.
Or makes him feel good, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why he takes the views with respect to time that he does. He has to take, and then that's why he holds to a neo-Lorentzian relativity rather than an Einsteinian relativity and a Bohmian mechanics with respect to his interpretation of quantum mechanics, so that he can rescue this notion of absolute simultaneity, so that he can maintain the idea that God's creation of time is simultaneous with time coming into being, so that he can maintain the kalam. Like, there's a lot there's a whole list, and it's funny because the PhD philosopher of physics Dan Linford was on Clubhouse last night, and he was just talking with some people and talking about some of these ideas. In fact, Jack Gangstrike was there with him, and Jack said, I have a whole list of ridiculous positions that Bill Craig holds to, just so that he can keep holding to the kalam. And I just started laughing to myself because, as somebody who was an avid follower of him back when I was a Christian, when I was a Catholic, there are a lot of things that positions he holds to that are ridiculous, and he only holds to them in virtue of wanting to be able to continue to hold to the Kalam cosmological argument. And it is, I do think there is a little bit of humor in it, because some of the, like the neo-Lorentzianism is just not, is just not, that one I don't get. That one really, I don't understand that one at all.
Would you agree with the Kalam rejecting that it is God that is the cause, but just that the universe did begin to exist and the universe does have a cause, which is really all that the Kalam proves, if you accept the premise?
So I think it can be meaningful in certain discussions to sort of grant the Kalam, like prima facie, that yeah, the universe began to exist, there has to be a cause, and then reject that cause is God. And I think that one can meaningfully press an argument that shows that you really just don't need God, despite the further analysis that's generally given, the conceptual analysis with respect to the universe as to what kind of cause would be needed to bring something like that into being. Even with respect to those particular arguments, I still think that one can meaningfully run an argument just granting the Kalam. But at the same time, I would say that, at least with respect to the second premise, I'm not convinced. I don't think that there are good reasons to think that the universe began to exist. I think there are good reasons to think that it may not have. But even further than that, and then this plays into the first premise a little bit, I think that, and this can kind of plays back into the notion of time, is that the whole notion of begins to exist, I think, supposes a sort of, I guess I'll say, a theoretic view of time. I prefer to say tense realism versus tense anti-realism for a variety of reasons, and I can explain the difference later. But so if one doesn't accept an atheoretic view of time, I think one can plausibly reject the first and the second premise just on the notion of how it's semantically describing what it's describing, this notion of, and the thing is this is a distinction that Craig himself acknowledges, the difference between a mere beginning versus begins to exist. And the example he gives is, imagine you had, a yardstick. Well, it makes sense to say that the yardstick begins at the first inch, but it wouldn't make sense to say that the yardstick begins to exist at the first inch, for the whole yardstick already exists. And so this sort of helps one understand the difference between mere beginning and begins to exist, where if one takes more of a B-theoretic view of time, where they, or a tense anti-realist view of time, they might say that the universe it may have a beginning, but it does not begin to exist. That would just be the wrong way to sort of phrase how we're looking, that like the universe is bounded at one end and then extends indefinitely in the other direction, and that the whole block universe, so to speak, is just there. It didn't come into a state of being at some point in the past. That's just the wrong way to look at it. And so that's really where the Kalam, or rather where notions of time and the ontology and the metaphysics of time really play into the Kalam cosmological argument. It's getting down to this notion of begins to exist with respect to the universe.
Okay. You have brought something really valuable to this discussion, and that is, when I say that the universe does not begin to exist, and this is the way most theists will look at it, that the only other possibility is that the universe is eternal, that either the universe is eternal or it began to exist. But you have introduced an entirely new possibility there.
Yes, that the universe is tenseless.
Right.
I can grant that it's bounded, that the extent of space-time is not indefinite in both directions, but that the space-time block, it like Carl Sagan said, the universe just is, and that's all.
Okay. Very good. Very good. I've seen a couple people argue to me that physics proves God, and that physics proves that there was an exact moment at which the universe came into existence. And when I've asked people to back this up, I have had one person that gave me some papers that were beyond me. Do you know what I'm talking about? And do you know what they are talking about?
So they're probably referring to the idea that the universe began to exist and then employing the conceptual analysis of, okay, so if this is what the universe is like ontologically, then this is what the cause of the universe must be like ontologically.
No, they're
And
looking at physics. They're
yeah,
looking at
and
quantum. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
so there are a variety of different arguments one can get. I mean, so like he probably wouldn't use. I'm almost certain he wouldn't use the word prove because he's much more intellectually honest in that. But inspiring philosophy, Michael Jones would say that physics provides strong evidence for theism. So there's the idea, like from cosmology, that the universe began to exist, and that physics shows us that the universe began to exist. And then there's this conceptual analysis of what sort of cause you would need for something like the universe, and that's got to be God. But then there's also quantum mechanics, where they try to show that quantum mechanics tells us that you need some sort of consciousness to underlie all of reality, to give it, its form and its structure, and to instantiate all these laws. And then that mind is God. And obviously there's a hell of a lot more nuance to that idea than what I just said, but just to give a brief outline of that's usually often something referred to as quantum idealism. It's sort of an idealistic way of looking at the world, that mind is fundamental to matter rather than the other way around, and that fundamental mind is the mind of God, and that this mind is like, so for inspiring philosophy, for Michael Jones, he's going to say that God's mind, that the universe is sort of, this is somewhat flowery language, but I don't really know how else to word it. You could say it's sort of a thought, but that's not quite the right word to use. That the universe is sort of a program running in God's mind, and that what underlies all of the information processing that gives rise to our universe is God's mind, that it's all rooted in his mind. And so he's going to take an idealist, I believe a subjective idealist view, metaphysically with respect to that. But there's a lot of different ways that people try to argue that physics shows that God exists.
Okay. Dave, did you have anything to add to that?
Nope. Leo knows much more about this than I do. So, yeah.
Okay. When I began this, I had 3 major questions, and we have covered all of my 3 major questions. So at this point, if anyone in the chat has any questions or comments, we will go to those now. And otherwise, Leo and Dave, feel free to expound on anything within the philosophy of time that you would like to speak more to.
I would like to expound a little bit more on A theory versus B theory, just because we didn't touch on that. And that's sort of like a central area of the philosophy of time. And it kind of goes back to McTaggart, though I'm not going to necessarily frame things exactly the way that he did, because there's been a lot of development of his original ideas that I think is relevant. But just a brief outline. An a-theoretic view is going to be one, and the reason it's A and B is because of the way that McTaggart originally formulated it, with A series versus B series of events, and how he described the sort of the ontological structure of these and how they differ. That's where that nomenclature comes from, so to speak. So an A theory is going to be something along the lines that the tenses of time, past, present, and future, are mind independent features of the world. They're objectively real features of the world that are meaningfully distinct from one another. And then you could go further into specifically presentism, which is probably the most popular version of the A theory, which would say that, and all which exists is in the present moment, and anything which is present exists. So anything which exists is present, and if it's in the present, it exists. And the B theory, contrastively, is the idea that the tenses of time, past, present, and future, are not mind-independent features or objectively real features of the world. And there isn't any meaningful distinction between them outside of the conventions that we ascribe to them. Now, me personally, because you can get into nuances with A theory versus B theory, and then there's a C theory or sort of like a growing block idea, or a growing past idea. Then there's moving spotlight ideas. And this sort of confounds the strict A, B theoretical distinction. But I still think that there's a meaningful way that we can distinguish between, that we can differentiate between these two different broad notions of time. And I think that that's with respect to how we look at the tenses of time. And so what I would say is that rather than a theory, what we should say is tense realism, where you think that the tenses of time are real features of the world that exist independently of our experience of it, that they're objective features of the world. And then contrast that with a tense anti-realism, which would say that the tenses are not real features of the world. They're not mind-independent features of the world, but are some sort of pragmatic or conventional feature of humans in our experience of reality that we throw onto it, much like, maps of, the United States or Canada or wherever you have a map for. And I think that that's a little bit more meaningful, because I think it broadens those two notions. Because I think that probably the biggest distinction with respect to the ontology of time that you're going to find in specifically the philosophy and the metaphysics of time, I think, is the distinction between the ontology of the tenses. Are the tenses of time real, or are they not? And so I think that separating views based on whether they take the tenses to be real or not is a better way of going about it. And I'll shut up for a little bit.
Oh, you're welcome. And I think if ever I get into a discussion and I ask a believer if they think the tenses are real or not, that probably would end the discussion right there.
Yeah, it probably would. I would imagine.
Dave?
That was beautifully put by Leo. I generally think as well, part of presentism is based on, it's a sort of philosophy of language thing. We basically see past, present, and future because of how our language constructs. Like Leo said, it's how we as humans move through the universe. So our language creates this kind of illusion of past, present, and future.
Okay. Yeah, and this is why I think that the discussions, because what you'll find in the philosophy of time is that there's a lot of discussions about the semantics of this stuff, tensed language, tensed facts. Well, if the tenses aren't real, what's grounding the truth of it? Right now, it is true that it is 3:03 p.m. Central Standard, U.S. Central Standard Time. But that's not going to be true at a later point. What makes it true, and not just what makes it true, but what makes it true right now versus later. And so how we talk about these kinds of things with respect to the reality, the ontology of the tenses, is an important feature. But for a lot of the things that Dave just said, I think it can be important. I think that meaningful discussions can be had there. But I don't think that with respect to the ontology of time, it's the most important discussion to be had. And maybe that's just because I think that physics really kind of, I might be a little strong, but I think really puts the nail in the coffin with respect to the ontology of time. The tenses are not real, but I don't think that, despite there being meaningful discussions there, that it's really where the focus should be. But that's just my personal take on that.
Okay.
Well, that's another thing about presentism. Going back to the physics, when it comes to presentism, it presupposes this idea that there is just this one moment and everything exists in this one moment. But relativity kind of shows us that there is no such thing as a sort of one moment. Everything is kind of relative to the observer, to the speaker, whatever, however you want to put it. I mean, if you look at the sun in the sky, that's history. The stars in the sky at night, they're all history. They don't actually exist, but we're looking at the past. So everything is kind of relative to the observer. So there is no one particular moment that everything exists in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's no preferred or unique now, so to speak. And the question there is, and this is when somebody's defending a presentist view, well, specifically, what I usually do is I just present a common problem in special relativity. I simplify it a little bit, but I'll say we've got Alice, we've got Bob, and we've got Charles. and they're all moving at different speeds. Doesn't matter what speeds they're moving at. All you need to know is that Alice is moving significantly faster than Bob, who is moving significantly faster than Charles. There's a lightning strike. Well, because of the differences in their speed, Bob sees the lightning strike after Alice and after Charles. Charles sees it before Bob, but after Alice. And Alice sees it before both of them. Whose present is the right present moment? But you usually can't get an answer. Or like what William Lane Craig would say is, well, none of them is correct. God's present moment is the right moment, but then that presupposes God and everything like that and things of that nature. But that is legitimately the response that Craig would give, is that, well, none of the three is correct. The real present moment would be God's present moment. He likes to say
It's when God made the lightning.
Yeah, exactly. Craig often appeals to what's called cosmic time because it's not universal. I mean, it is, but it's only universal in a very contrived way, in a very conventional way. And cosmic time is the time, if you took a clock and you set it to T, you set it to 0 at the moment of the Big Bang, the earliest moment that our physics can take us back to, and you let it tick at 1 second per second, ignoring all relativistic over-under effects that would cause time dilation, with respect to the clock ticking with respect to the expansion of space-time or space. So it's moving such that it doesn't see that. It would read out 13.78 billion years since we set it to 0. The age of the universe. Now, what Craig, and that's entirely conventional. We defined it to be that way. That is not an objective frame of reference, and every cosmologist will tell you that. But Craig thinks that it is, and I think that's also God's time. That cosmic time is God's time, and that's the one objective present moment all throughout everywhere in the universe. But that is just straightforwardly false.
Okay, you just said something that I don't think you meant the way I understood it. So I'll let you help me understand it better. You said that the universe being 13.8 billion years old is subjective, and all cosmologists will agree to that. So we have no idea when the when the universe began to exist, or when the Big Bang was?
Well, so the universe, the Big Bang was roughly 13.8 billion years ago relative to us. If there were a species 6 billion years in the future, it wouldn't be. It'd be 19.8 billion years in their past. Okay. And we would also be in their past. So relative to kind of like where humans are at in space-time, the furthest back we can currently go is 13.8 billion years.
Okay.
And that's relative to the expansion of the universe, which is why that is kind of anybody who exists, any intelligent enough species that existed now, so to speak, and I'm not using like a presentist now, it just existed in the present day, would see the universe, well, assuming their physics was on par with ours and wasn't more advanced, would be able to go back only about 13.8 billion years in the universe's history.
Okay. When I asked for questions, we did get one that I've been hanging on to, which is why the Higgs was called I'm assuming the question is, why was the Higgs particle called the God particle?
So the Higgs particle, I can't remember who coined it the God particle, but it was initially called the God particle because people were saying that it should be there, but it was very elusive and hard to find, kind of like God. So that's that is okay. That's where the term the God particle came from. Is that well, it's supposed to be there, but okay, so where is it? Why can't we find it? It's like you're saying that it's there, but then I can't see it, kind of like God. It's the God particle. So that's where the name comes from.
Okay.
And then we did find it in October of 2011 and confirmed it in early 2012, and then celebrated the results on July 4th of 2012.
Okay. I thought it was called that because it was a search for the beginning of the which at that time most people acknowledged or at least believed that God caused, and that therefore it was kind of in a way a search for God.
Yeah, so the Higgs boson, as it's called, did help us, and understanding that physics did really help us a lot with respect to particle physics at the early universe. But the motivation for searching for it comes from the 1960s, I believe, 50s or 60s, I think 60s, where Peter Higgs, Francois Englert, and Brout, I can never remember his first name. Edward, something like that. I don't know. But we're trying to figure out why gluons, the elementary particle that carries the strong nuclear force, is massless. The photon, which carries electromagnetism, is massless. But the W and Z bosons, which carry weak nuclear force, are massive. Okay, why? Huh? Why? And they wanted to figure out why. And what they were capable of mathematically deriving is that, well, they would be massive if there were this sort of field that they're interacting with, and their interaction with this field is creating a form of energy that we're capable of measuring in these particles, these force carriers, and that would manifest as what we call mass. And the mechanism through which this happened was thereby called the Brout-Englert-Higgs mechanism. And the particle of that field was the Brout-Englert-Higgs, or just the Higgs boson.
Okay. If you notice me chuckling, it's because there's a couple of comments that came in that I thought were quite humorous. The first is from Thor Rasmussen, who says, "I don't understand time. I guess that's why I came an hour late." The second one is from Command Cyborg, who said, "I heard he wanted to call a book The Goddamn Particle, but the editor changed it."
Yeah, that's a common joke out there. I want to call it
really?
The Goddamn Particle, but the editors wouldn't let me.
I've not heard that one before.
And that was because it was just physicists were like, why the fuck are we not seeing this thing? They were just like, this goddamn particle. That's the goddamn particle, not the god particle.
And Nerdy Rodent says Higgs boson walks into a church, but the priest yells at him to get out. Higgs boson complains, "But without me, you can't have mass."
That's a good one. Yeah. I like the dad style physics jokes that are out there. They all crack me up.
Captive Desk points out that Brian Cox does a lot of talks on Higgs boson.
Mm-hmm. Leonard Susskind also has a really good one called The Higgs Boson Demystified. A little bit more technical.
Okay.
Having some basic understanding of some basic mechanics and physics stuff like that helps, but I mean it's accessible to the motivated enough layperson to understand, certainly.
Mm-hmm. The reason that I have difficulty with science, and I've explained this a few other times on my channel, is because science doesn't relate to my field. And so the last time I ever really paid much attention to science was I had to take 2 science classes to get through college. So I took Biology 101 and I took Chemistry 101 for non-science majors. That was an absolutely fun course. We learned how to make brandy. We learned how to make nylon. We learned how to make styrofoam. But if you ask me what I learned about chemistry, the only real thing I learned about chemistry, and this was really the point of the whole class, is that chemistry does have an effect on everyday life. The things that we have in everyday life come from chemistry. But that was 1980. So there's this huge gap in my knowledge of science of anything happened since 1980. And part of the reason that I would see whatever made the national news. So, I knew about Higgs boson because that made national news. But anything that did not make national news did not rise to the level of getting my attention. And so now it's kind of funny that as a believer, I intentionally did not pay attention to anything that might challenge my faith. So that now that I'm an unbeliever, I'm going, my God, there's an awful lot out there that I just don't know.
Oh yeah, people ask me, Leo, how do you know all the stuff that you know? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Do you know how much I don't like? I don't know anything really. Like I don't. Like there's so much to learn out there about so many things, and this is why experts are experts in one very specialized area of a specialized area of a specialized field of a broader field, because there's a lot of knowledge out there, and it's not possible for one person to know it all.
Mhm.
Unless you're David Hume.
Mhm.
Yeah, unless you're David Hume, then yeah, you know everything in all ways at all times.
I'm currently making a video that's almost finished where a ridiculous childlike person challenges Alex O'Connor based on a misunderstanding of Alex O'Connor and his own personal views on what he thinks he understands from David Hume. Comment on what you think of David Hume and his ideas in general.
Oh, I thought Leo was going to go. He's actually one of my favorite philosophers, and
Okay.
I like his writing style.
Okay.
And I think a lot of his ideas were well ahead of his time. And a lot of the stuff that he argued still has great contributions today, like the problem of induction, sort of on the emotions and with morality. A lot of.
I'm going to have to
just
work
seen the
that
joke.
into my video. I've already recorded it, but I can throw that into a slide.
So yeah, I think Hume's great. There's stuff I disagree with him on, but I think he was very influential, and I think a lot of atheists should read him, especially his books on natural theology.
Okay. Okay.
What I would say with respect to Hume is that, you know, there's a lot of people that like to claim him in their camps, but I don't know. I've never really like studied Hume in depth. I only know him with respect to various metaphysical inquiries that I've delved into, with respect to, you know, philosophy of science, causation, which Hume was a big person in getting sort of kickstarting that discussion, at least beyond people like Aristotle, because Aristotle started everything. Aristotle created the world, don't you know?
He caused the Big
unless you're a
Bang.
Thomist, then it was St. Thomas Aquinas created the world. But
Yeah.
I would say that Hume was no friend to theism. That is certainly something that I think needs to be said right off the bat. David Hume was no friend of theism. From what I've seen from people who I have a large amount of trust in with respect to understanding Hume's philosophy, he was at best maybe an agnostic with some appreciation for certain theistic aspects, but certainly was not a theist himself. Whether he was an atheist, you know, maybe not, but agnostic or like agnostic, maybe something along those lines at the best. But I really do like, I think that Hume's problem of induction is interesting. It's not what a lot of theists think that it is. It's not an argument against induction. That's not what it is. But I think that, if I remember correctly, I think his problem of induction sort of played into how he thought about things like causality and the laws of nature, which were two areas in metaphysics and in, you could almost say in an early area of like philosophy of physics that he was, you know, really talked a lot about was causation. Hume would have thought that causation was sort of a regularity feature in the universe, that was sort of what were the words that he used? One of them was necessary. What was the other one? I want to say necessary connection, but that doesn't sound right. Between two events. And there's a lot of people that still take to a basic Humean view with respect to causality, even today, with respect to the laws of physics, even today. I think Hume said that, Hume was the one that said that the laws of physics sort of emerge out of the sort of the mosaic of reality. They're not something that imposes upon it. I think that was sort of a kind of something that Hume thought with respect to that.
Regularities.
Yeah. And then that played into his regularity theory of causation and how he thought about this and other areas of metaphysics led into his development of the problem of induction. And well, anytime you try to show that induction is meaningful, you're using induction to do that, because you're saying that induction has always worked. So yeah, but then that just means that you're inducing that induction has always. So it's kind of, you know, a little bit of a circle there. We got a problem here.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a very, 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 very simple way of summarizing what his problem of induction was. But no, it does not mean induction doesn't work. It does not mean it can't work. It does not mean it is not useful.
Okay, very good. Personally, I consider myself a jack of all trades, which is not unusual for my background in law. If there's any one area that I'm kind of an expert in, it's 1990s workers' compensation law, which is now obsolete. Okay, that's all that I had for today's show. We have just a few minutes left. Is there anything else that either you, Dave, or you, Leo, would like to bring up?
No, I think we covered
Other
quite a
than,
lot.
oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, go on.
Go
Other
right
than
ahead.
thank you to Trusty Ape Cod podcast. He said he Googled it. Hume's words are necessary causal connection. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
I saw that, but I wasn't sure how that related, and so I didn't bring it up. Okay. Necessary causal causation. Icarus wants to know, Dave, are you an armchair philosopher?
I'm more of a lie on the floor watching TV philosopher.
I was going to say, I'm more of a footstool philosopher rather than an armchair philosopher. So,
Okay. That sounds good. All right. Let's see. Whoops. I tried to bring up a comment and okay. That's really cool, Gigi. I would listen to an ASMR stream of you detailing 1990s workers' comp laws. Trust me, it would be boring. It would be really boring. The only thing that would be somewhat interesting is the Florida compensation, because in Florida there was a book published of the exact amount that workers' comp paid for every procedure that a doctor could do. And one of the things that the doctors rightfully complained about was that their compensation for taking care of a patient was limited to the point where they got less for surgery on a patient than what the patient paid to, say, the physical therapist or, you know, other people involved in their care. And it was really an unfair situation. It was. Doctors almost didn't even want to see you if you had a work-related injury. They had to weigh guaranteed payment because it's coming from an insurance company against we get almost nothing for the work that we're doing. Oh, I know I remember now what the specific was that the doctor was complaining about was that there was a man who lost 3 of his fingers, and she was able to reattach 2 of them, and he was able to use those 2 fingers, but the third one was too badly damaged, and they couldn't reattach it, and so they gave him a prosthetic. And she said the insurance company had to pay more for the prosthetic finger than for the 2 that I reattached and he can actually use. Which back in the 90s, prosthetics didn't move the way they do today. Okay, now that we've gotten sidetracked just a bit, let's go ahead and close down. And first of all, Leo, is there anyone that you would like to shill for? Tell us a little bit about what you have upcoming, either on your channel or elsewhere.
Shill for, I'm trying to think here. Mark Reed is a channel, REID. Mark Reed is a channel you should check out if you haven't. If I'm going to shill for somebody, definitely check out his channel. Monday or Wednesday of next week, I, on my own channel, am going to be doing another installment of my series Apologetics Analyzed, where I analyze various arguments and videos and stuff like that that our modern day apologists are putting up I'm going to be doing another installment in that series on the discussion that Frank Turek had. I call him Tank Frurek because I'm weird like that. That Tank Frurek had with Stephen C. Meyer and William Lane Craig on the Kalam cosmological argument. So that should be fun. So if you're interested in stuff like that, feel free to swing by. Other than that, I don't think I have anything coming up after that. Not immediately, anyway.
Interesting note on Frank Turek. I used to pay quite a bit of attention to him, but I quit ever since he blocked me on Twitter. And the reason that he blocked me is he posted a video of someone saying that blasphemy laws only apply to believers, that God never intended blasphemy laws to apply to unbelievers. And I said, well, then fucking Christ, is that a good thing? That got me blocked.
Oh, that's too rich.
I wanted to see if he practiced what he preached, and the answer is no.
Nope.
He didn't believe in his own post. Dave, what do you have coming up?
I'll chill for Luke, Bearded Heretic. He has a stream next week on the Answers of Reason channel. But I'm working on a video that discusses a lot of the things that atheists get wrong when they discuss belief and the idea of belief. And I'll be delving into like the psychology of social schema and how our minds work when it comes to beliefs and adopting beliefs. And I'm also working on a video. I saw an interesting post where somebody asked, how did people who were theists, how did they see kind of like the new atheism movement and how they reacted to it? And I thought it might be interesting to do a video from my perspective as a lifelong atheist and how I saw that movement and what it became and all that kind of thing. So that's the other thing I'm working on.
Okay. Those both sound very interesting.
Can I make a comment really quickly?
Sure, go ahead.
It's amazing to me, or I guess a better word to use would be a little bizarre at the number of people, I find in general, who seem to think that belief is like a negative, like there's some sort of negative connotation. Like
that's
somebody else, well, so you believe in evolution. I'm like, well, I don't believe in evolution. I accept it as a fact. Yeah, but that's what it means to believe something. It's to accept it as true. So I'm definitely gonna have to keep my eyes out for that video because it's always just struck me as strange why belief is viewed as like almost like it's wrong to have beliefs.
I actually got blocked by a handful of people last week for arguing that there is nothing wrong with having beliefs. And they were skeptics and atheists. And that's kind of what prompted me to write the video.
Yeah, and that's just really weird. I don't understand. Who knows? People on the internet just are weird these days. You know, it's getting late and it's getting weird. That's what I can say about it.
Thank you very much, Logan Fisher, for joining the channel. What I have coming up on the channel, because I had 2 streams in a row, I'm going to do 2 scripted videos in a row. I'm going to watch what the algorithm does, and I'm considering the possibility of moving the streams to Saturday permanently and releasing the scripted videos on Tuesday, depending on how this goes. The scripted video is a response to Kyle. That's Orthodox Kyle, who claims that cosmic skeptic is not a real skeptic. And then I'll have another video on Saturday as well. And then I'll go back to my regular format for a while, mostly because I booked Dr. Richard Carrier for February 21st. So from then out, I will have the live streams on Tuesday, at least until I get through Dr. Richard Carrier. And then I will consider the possibility of switching to Saturdays in March. And with that, thank you very much to everyone in the chat for adding to the discussion and for your comments and for the 2 new members. Thank you so much, Dave and Leo, for discussing this. This was something I had very little knowledge of, and I think I learned a great deal today.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you, Leo. I learned a lot from you as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, Dave.
Okay. Live your life.